Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our Mind on Music, where we explore the amazing world of music. We celebrate the extraordinary talents that shape music and bridge the connection between artists and audience. What draws us to music, and how does it help us connect? Today, I have the true honor of speaking with Janet Horvath, a lifelong musician who held the position of Associate Principal Cello with the Minnesota Orchestra for 32 years, from 1980 to 2012. Janet has performed in many different musical settings in North America, Europe, and Asia over the years. Janet is also an award-winning author. She holds a Master of Fine Arts degree from Hamline University, which she received in 2017, and is a regular contributor to Interlude.hk in Hong Kong, having written well over 400 pieces for that publication. Her book, Playing Less Hurt, an Injury Prevention Guide for Musicians, won a Gold Independent Publisher Award in 2009. In her second book, The Cello Still Sings, a generational story of the Holocaust and the transformative power of music, Janet weaves together an incredible 70-year history of discovery, of resilience, and of hope. The Cello Still Sings won in 3 categories in the 2024 American Legacy Award and was selected as one of the 100 best books of 2023 by the Kirkus Reviews. Janet is a passionate advocate for human rights, a powerful voice against racism, and I cannot wait to start chatting with Janet. So, without further ado, here's Janet Horvath. Welcome.
Thank you.
I read your book about a year ago. The book was actually released a year and a half ago. It took me a little while to get a copy of it to our school library here in China. But once I did, in August of last year, I read the book. And I think that was just for me to understand the sort of scope of the book. And then I found the audiobook version, which...
Yeah, it came out this year.
I like audiobooks anyway, but I just thought that was actually a really cool spin on experiencing your book. One of the things was at the end of the audiobook, you actually play a clip of Kol Nidre.
Hopefully it's not a clip, it's the whole thing. You can't interrupt the piece in the middle, which they did. And I, convinced them to add Kol Nidre, which they don't usually have music in an audiobook.
Yes.
And I had to hire a technician, a producer, a place to do it. I paid my pianist, and we had it specifically recorded for that purpose, because otherwise there would be audience noise and stuff like that. So when I listened and heard that only, 6 minutes of it was there, I, was really mad. But they did fix that.
Wow. I'm really glad I mentioned it then, because I wouldn't have known all of that. I didn't know that.
I said that, what about the people that download the book when it was, still an excerpt? And she said that they could re-download it and make sure that they get the whole thing. So it should be the whole thing. No.
Okay. Well, now I have to go back and confirm, because now I realize there was a whole thing.
It's about a 12-minute piece.
Yeah. I mean, I have listened to it now. I should say I'm not Jewish, so a lot of the things that you talked about, I understand all of what you talk about in your book, which is one of the things I love about your book, is that it just felt really sincere, and I almost would use the word like unfiltered, because it's like you talk about your family experiences. My family, I guess I'll just go back one generation, but South American. And for us, food is a major part of everything we do. My mom is Guyanese, my stepdad is Jamaican, and the food is
wonderful, amazing. Yeah.
I feel pretty lucky just for that. And then you talk all through your book, and actually I follow you on Facebook, and we've commented back and forth, and I saw you comment about food a lot. And the reason I say that is because it's one of the things that made me connect. Like when I was reading about when you were a kid and your friends would come over to the house, your mom would cook food, and they were like, didn't know what it was, but it ended up being awesome. And your mom was so proud to share that with them. That was my childhood, except we had curry and roti, and people said, why is your food green?
Yeah. That's great.
I just loved that. That was one of the things. I was going back doing the listen of the audiobook, and I thought, why does this connect so much with me? Like, it's not my family's history. In fact, I remember my mom, when I was a kid, I was studying a historical unit about the Second World War. I asked my mom, because my mom was born in 1941. She wouldn't remember. But I said, what about grandmoms? Like, does she remember? And she said, I don't think your grandmother is actually fully aware that that war happened. And they were living in the capital of Guyana in the 1940s. But I thought, wow, like, how could you be any more different in that sense? And still, you managed to make these connections that make it feel really personal and, again, really sincere.
Well, that's great to hear, because, when I first released the book, I got some advice from, publicity mucky mucks who do books, and they said, okay, your audience are the Holocaust museums and the Jewish community centers and the synagogue. And I said, well, I don't want to preach to the choir. Oh, no, 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 no. You're not going to get those people unless a Jewish person says to a dear friend, I think you should read this book. And she couldn't have been more wrong.
Yeah.
Because most of my audiences are not Jewish, some of whom don't know anybody Jewish, and some of whom don't know this history. Some connect because they know me or know the cello or love the cello or know music, and know Bernstein. And some, they really want to know more about that time, especially in this political environment. So the conversations have been really heartening.
Yeah, that was one of the things that I thought about. I am typically, honestly, I mean, people who know me even joke about it. The only thing I know is music. It's like, if you show me a flower, I might not be able to tell you what type of flower that is, but then music. And that was the connection for me. I saw you initially on social media prior to the release of your book, and I was curious, what is this book? And then when I read about overview synopsis of what the book was going to be, I was like, okay, all right, I'll look. I guess for me, if I'm studying history that is related somehow to music, then I'm in. But that was my connection. It wasn't World War II. It wasn't, to be honest, the Jewish connection. But now I'm so glad that I did take the time to read it and did make that connection. So I think your muckety mucks were absolutely wrong.
Minnesota Orchestra cellist is using her music to tell a story, one of survival. Nearly 80 years ago today, her parents made a decision that may have saved their lives during the Holocaust. Leah Bino reports it was music that helped them heal and is still impacting generations to come.
Communicating through music for as long as she can remember, Janet Horvath recalls growing up in Toronto in a home that was filled with smiles and learning to play the piano from her mother and cello from her father. But when the instruments went silent, there was plenty the family never spoke about. It wasn't until after her mother had a stroke in her late 70s and died 8 years later, Janet learned about a private recorded interview conducted a decade earlier by her cousin. This was the first time Janet finally heard her mother speak about surviving the Holocaust.
So where should I start? Way back? I can start way back.
Through this and other research, Janet learned her parents were first dating in Budapest just as Germany was losing World War II. Yet the Nazis continued moving in and rounding up every Hungarian Jew they could find.
May 26th of 1944, my mother had to get false papers and permission because she was only 17. She borrowed a dress. They went to a justice of the peace and said they were Catholic, and they were married, and my father was deported the next morning to the copper mines of Bor, Yugoslavia, for slave labor.
Meantime, his young bride moved around the city, hiding for her life.
Could hear the guns. They saw it was finished, but they were still killing everybody.
They were deporting people, up to 12,500 people a day, men, women, and children, on trains to Auschwitz, the infamous camp. And my mother evaded that.
Eventually, the war ended. George Horvath reunited with his wife, Catherine, and a cello.
This is Bernstein here.
Along the way, meeting Janet's personal icon, Leonard Bernstein, best known much later for West Side Story. Decades earlier, the famed American conductor changed her father's life. A moment George didn't speak to his daughter about until he was within a year of dying at 87 years old. Janet followed in her father's classical music career footsteps, playing 32 years with the Minnesota Orchestra. She also spent the last decade putting her family history into print. Her book, The Cello Still Sings, is part history lesson, part hope and awareness for the future.
This history of playing all these concerts and bringing music and hope to those refugees was something that I thought the public needs to know about.
And while it took decades for Janet to even come close to understanding the tremendous amount of pain her parents went through, she knows each note of a few recordings from her father's 38 years with the Toronto Orchestra are a gift.
So it takes me back to my childhood, listening to him practice these things.
And a reflection of the healing value of music no one can put into words.
If we can, I'd like to go back to Kol Nidre. I've done some research. I've listened to different recordings of it. So I ask this question knowing part of the answer, but wanting really to get your thoughts on this. I guess as a non-Jewish person, my question for you is, why is Kol Nidre so significant? You know, like you just said that you didn't even want them to play just a clip of it. You wanted it to be played and the whole piece. And why is it so significant?
Well, I usually try to explain that very thing in all my talks so that people realize that it's a very beautiful piece that all the cellists want to play, but it has a real sacred meaning to the Jewish people. And that is because Bruch heard this ancient chant and, wrote this piece based on the ancient chant. This is the holiest day of the Jewish year. The holiday is called Yom Kippur, and it's a day of fasting where we not only have to try to atone for any sins we might have committed and ask forgiveness of God, but we also are required to ask forgiveness of friends, family, co-workers, children, parents, whether we intentionally hurt them or not, and to try to do better in the following year. So it's a self-examination day where you really want to try to be a better person in the coming year. So Kol Nidre is the ancient chant that introduces the holy day the previous evening. And it's a real privilege to participate in setting the tone for the entire day that is following. It is sung or chanted or played in every synagogue all over the world that night, and has always been. So there is no Jew that doesn't know this piece. They may not necessarily know the cello piece, but they know the chant. So it has a dimension among all Jewish people because it's universal. It's all over the world. That same evening, that piece is done. So on top of that level, it's a personal sacredness, really, because my father, when I was growing up, played it every year in the synagogue that we grew up in Toronto, Canada. And, I was obviously very involved with his preparation for it and his nerves and his anticipation of trying to be what he needed to be for the people that were attending the synagogue. And then when I got the job here, I've been doing it here in the Twin Cities for more than 30 years as well. So between the two of us, we've done more than 6 decades of Kol Nidre every year. And the incredible thing, people sometimes ask me, oh, how did you get your title? And I hope this isn't a spoiler alert, but when my father retired, he imagined that he would sell his cello, that I would sell my cello, which is an old Italian also, and that I would buy a Strat. And I could have a Stradivarius to play. Now, of course, that was a pie in the sky idea because Strads are way over the top price wise, and I could never attain that. But also, the Stradivarius cellos are typically large, and I'm not large as a person.
Now you're
So,
talking to the choir because I'm
oh,
5'5" at best.
oh, really? I'm
Yeah.
at five best also. So we ended up selling my father's cello to, and it became obvious that his cello also was big for me and resistant. And he was satisfied that the principal cello of the Minnesota Orchestra bought it, who's a 6'3", big, husky, football type guy, plays beautifully. And so the cello was next to me. Then Tony got an angel in his life who had or purchased a wonderful, amazing instrument that is comparable to a Stradivarius. And he sold my father's cello, and I kind of lost track of it. So a number of years later, I get a Facebook message, and I confess I'm on it quite a bit. And here's this woman with a very not Jewish name, Mary Dorman Fanoff, who says, Janet, I played your father's cello at the Museum of Jewish Heritage this week, and I knew that it had belonged to a Holocaust survivor, and I tried to track you down. I'm so glad that I found you because I wanted to touch bases and hear more about the history of the cello. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm playing Kol Nidre this Friday night at Temple Emmanuel in New York City.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Heart is beating, and I called this woman immediately because we were going to be playing it obviously at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And at my father's cello still sings, is still playing Kol Nidre.
Wow. Wow. That's very cool. First of all, I didn't quite realize what you said about this piece being played in every synagogue around the world. I imagine, was that since it was written, or like when did that start?
Bruch was a romantic composer in the late 1800s.
Hmm.
Yeah. It's been a very popular piece
Right.
ever.
Okay. Thank you for explaining that. And I did get an inkling of that from the book itself when you talk about trying to explain to these like these kids, these middle school and high school kids who are going to play in Landsberg, and they're just, I mean, I'm looking, you can't see the other side of the camera here, but I'm looking at my classroom here, and I'm thinking about these kids when I'm trying to explain to them about dynamics and expression, and I call it playing the rests, like give it a little air to breathe. It's not, music is not all sound. It's sound and silence.
The silences are just as important.
Exactly. So I loved when you were trying to explain to these kids, wondering if they even understood your English that you were speaking to them. That idea of the depth of the importance of this piece of music. It's not just notes. So I had an inkling of the importance of this piece of music. And listening to it, some of the recordings are you can feel the depth of it without knowing the whole story, just from the music itself, which I guess that's kind of what music is, right? I always say it's kind of like a magician does tricks, and musicians, we do it's like this magic that we do, but we tell people what the magic is. We're not hiding our bag of tricks. We're just playing with real feeling, and and people still sit there amazed by, what did you just do? How did you make sound do that?
When you touch an audience, when you really are emotionally authentic and communicate something that deep, people get it no matter if they're classical music buffs or not. They experience this
Yeah.
amazing feeling.
Yeah. I talk to all kinds of people on Our Mind on Music. I've been really lucky that people say yes when I ask, And one of the things is sometimes people ask me like, what type of music do you like? And I know what they mean by that usually is genre. Do you like classical music? Do you like jazz music? No, I like sincere music. It could be, I mean, I've spoken with a guy who is almost a punk rock type guy on here, country artists and pop artists, etc.
Bluegrass, world music,
Yeah, exactly.
Romani music. Oh, yeah, I love all that kind of
I
music.
had a fantastic conversation with Dr. Jennifer Walden, who is an international school music teacher as well. And she works with Smithsonian. And she talked about what is world music. Like if it's not world music, what is it? Mars music? Like everything is world. She didn't say that. That was me saying that. But it's like everything is world music. So even for me, I don't want to disregard the idea of the term world music because I think that's important to keep your mind open. But I think to say that, for example, classical music, Western classical music is not world music. Yes, it is. All of it is, you know.
That's a good point.
So sincerity, which, you talked in your book, I believe it's close to the end when you talked about playing in Landsberg and you talked about explaining to these kids the depth of this music. And then when you played, I think you used the word a cathartic moment, which is a whole different thing. It's something that, one of my goals with Our Mind on Music is to try to help people who don't play music understand, not just like people understand music in the way that they understand music, whether they play it or they don't. But I think that's one thing that I would love to help explain a little bit is that feeling when you're playing. And it's like an out of body experience sometimes when everything connects just so, you know?
That was the experience. It was like, and I think I said this in the book, that we ascended to a different plane, that we played better than we know we could. And
Mhm.
some of that collective energy and emotion took everybody, you know, into this, spheres. And
Yeah.
so it was, everybody was in tears, the audience and the musicians,
Yes.
and they'll never forget it. The
Yeah.
kids won't either, having had that experience.
Yeah. I mean, those having had that experience and at that young age, that is synapse forming. Like they're not gonna they're not gonna easily stop playing music at this point, knowing that they can reach that feeling.
Yeah. It was amazing and uplifting and reconciliatory. That's why I ended the book with that.
Yeah.
When you go to school and you are writing a memoir, the first thing they tell you is you can't write a memoir about 70 years of history. The most you should do is 10 years. And then, I kind of had to really put my head down and figure out how to make 70 years be seamless and work. Like, what would the structure be? And then they always said, you writers, you go on way too long and you should end your book 50 or 100 pages sooner than you think. And I'm going like, okay, how am I going to end this book? And this opportunity basically was meant to be. It fell in my lap that in 2017,
Yeah.
I get this phone call from Landsberg, Germany, from a German woman who says, "Oh, Janet, I'm so happy to finally find you and what your parents went through. It's so terrible. And we have to teach the next generations. People like me, German, not Jewish people. And would you do us the honor to come to Landsberg next year in May? We're going to have a commemoration
Mhm.
concert." I said, "Well, yeah, sure. I mean, May in Germany might be nice." And yeah, I guess. I'll have a little concert and whatever. And then she says, oh, we're going to have the program like with Bernstein and the same music. And would you do us the honor to play Kol Nidre? And at that point, we were both crying, across the ocean.
Right.
Because I didn't know if I could do it, actually, to play that piece in Germany, in the very spot that my father played with Leonard Bernstein 70 years before.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole year was emotionally overwrought as I kind of focused to be able to do that. And we didn't know that the whole city would rally and do exhibits and movies and demonstrations, and 40 people whose parents were associated with that displaced persons camp, a few of whom were born there, came. And it was a week of activities honoring us and the orchestra. It was mind-boggling. Yeah, it was out-of-body experience, exactly.
The whole thing is incredible, the phone call. And you just said something too. I was thinking about that, like, how do you hold it together? Like, it's okay. First of all, the 70 years, that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about, because I remember at some point hearing you talking about how you had sort of segments of the book lying on your dining room table and on the chairs and the floor. And I was trying to think, like, it is massive. It's a 70-year story. And you had to somehow, first of all, weave it all together. And second of all, not lose us as readers in the process, And, it's kind of like, how long should a song be? I don't know. How long is a piece of string? Like, as long as you need it to be, So again, the fact that you didn't listen to that, you didn't listen to 10 years, 2017 was a huge year for you. You were finishing your book, is that right? Because I know you finished your MFA, your Master of Fine Arts at Hamlin 2017. You got the call 2017. It's like, that was a massive year for you.
Mm-hmm. And there was 10 years of research of, going into archives, hiring a genealogy person and going into the archives in Hungary. Luckily, I speak Hungarian, and some incredible discoveries, going to the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum and finding documents that, we didn't imagine existed,
Yeah.
It was amazing.
Yeah.
And the other thing was that I really wanted to hang on to the readers, but I wanted to take them back to my childhood and what I might have thought then or felt and what I needed to learn. And
Right.
so I decided to use that theatrical term called entr'actes, and I explain it often in my talks that in the old days, when they didn't have the technology to change sets quickly, they had to keep the audience engaged, and so they had these entr'actes of either a mime or a dance or some contrasting art form entertain the audience while they change the sets behind the curtain. And so I use that term entr'acte when I catapult the reader back to my childhood. And from the standpoint of my childhood, I tell a story or a vignette. And I think a few people have commented that it gave the readers a break from the history and from, for some people, finally reading my father's testimony was difficult. It's difficult material. It's absolutely not the worst experiences that some Jewish people experienced, but it was bad enough for some people that they needed a break, and that was the way I did it. another thing my advisor said at school was when I came to him, and he had written about his parents' story, and they were survivors. They hid in the forest. They were partisans. When I went to see him and for the first time, and he said, "Okay, what's your thesis?" He says, "Oh no, not another Holocaust book," And and yes, there are quite a number of those. The interest has not dwindled in how that could have happened. But I wanted to write about my generation, about, first of all,
Me
how
too.
it affected us. And it really did affect us growing up, but also how a refugee, how a stateless person, after going through such trauma, could put their life back together again. And
Yes.
in my parents' situation, it was through music, and they were able to bring solace and hope and beauty to other people who had suffered. And so I wanted to kind of illustrate how people can move on from something so horrible. And yeah, music was the lifeline.
Yeah, I mean, there are two things in what you just said. One of them is I've thought that many times, like, how do you go through something like that? How do you see something like that happening and it's happening to you and your family, etc., and manage to go on with life? And you used, I don't remember if this was again in the book or in an interview, you used the word chutzpah, which
Yeah.
is a word that I know. I don't know why I know so many Yiddish words growing up in Toronto. I guess just the neighborhood.
Probably.
You mentioned at one point that one of the things for you learning about this whole story was the starting to understand, oh, that's why my parents did some of the things that they did, or said some of the things, acted the way that they did. You weren't allowed to go for sleepovers, which, for example, and you used, I think, chronic worrier was one of the things that you mentioned that you had inherited. You worry, you know. But one of the things that you've also inherited is chutzpah. Like, think about that story about when you were going to try out for the orchestra, and they said, we think you're not ready for this, and you said, yes, I am. Like, I mean, I've been there. I've said things where I knew I was right, but maybe I should have, like, I don't know, held back a little bit in the way I said it. But I'm hearing your stories about being told who your audience is going to be and how long your history is allowed to be, and you had none of it. You said, no, this is what it is. This is who I'm trying to talk to, everybody, and this is how long the story is. I'm not going to truncate the story or call Nidre at the end of the audiobook. Like, that's chutzpah. You were, you weren't letting them push you around. So the legacy of what your parents went through, and that urge, that ability to move on from something as horrible as the Holocaust, influenced, without you even knowing that story previously, exactly what they had gone through. It sort of seeped its way into just your being. In your experience now, you've played that concert and you've seen the reaction of people. You've talked to people like me who've read your book. Where are you now with feeling that? Like, is it a weight that you have to sort of tell people more about this? Or is it like How does that feel to try and get this word out to people further?
Well, it's not a weight. It's an amazing high, really, to be able to not only tell them about the book, but then to have conversations with people that we brainstorm about, well, where do we go from here? Because the Holocaust, sadly, was not the last genocide. There have been horrible genocides since then. And the world seems to be, kind of leaning to more hatred that's going on right now. And I feel very much that this is something I can do. And at least I can perhaps put out some positive vibrations into the world and hope that it resonates with people to bring people more together rather than being divisive, which is how it seems, well, in this country anyway, for sure. And that music can always do that, to bring people's souls together. So not to say that I'm free of these genetically inherited traits. I'm not. I still am a worrier. I still, catch myself sometimes realizing that, oh, this is from my parents. I'll be in the shower and suddenly feel so grateful that I have a shower and sweet smelling soap, which my parents didn't for a while. So there's still a lot of that I carry with me. But I feel like, when you play a concert, as you know very well, you work for months on, performing this particular piece, and then you're out there and you have this great, hopefully, a connection with the audience, and in 20 minutes or 30 minutes, it's over and it's in the spheres. Yes, you can have a recording, but it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
People clap afterwards to tell you that they enjoyed it. With a book, you can spend, a whole day trying to get one paragraph down. And then when you finally finish the book and it gets to a publisher and it's all edited and then it's out in the world, and you don't know what the reception's going to be. You don't know if people enjoy it, and they don't clap. But what's been amazing for me and heartening is that there have been so many people that have written me private notes saying how it affected them, how much they enjoyed it, how they couldn't put it down, whatever. Which I don't know if I imagined that would happen. And great reviews, some really good reviews. I'm hoping more come in. Hint, hint, hint.
Yeah, for those people watching, you can go onto Amazon. That's one of the places you can go on and give a review for the book. Yeah, please.
Yeah, that's really very critical, because that's how the publisher takes the book to the next steps. It was just recently translated into German, so hopefully that takes off too.
I'd love to see if we can get it translated to Chinese, to Mandarin.
I'd love that. The book feels like a tangible legacy for me.
We used to be the adults in the room, like the kids in the room, then the adults in the room. Now we're the oldest adults in the room. We're reaching our.
Not me, not yet.
Well, me, I obviously, but so you know what I mean? Like now this comes to us where we're passing along to the next generation. Do you have things that you'd like to specifically say to the G3, so the third generation of survivors, but also just to the world?
One thing that is really very evident is that those of us G2s are desperate to get our parents' story. Many of us weren't that lucky as me, who, in the last year of my father's life, asked that innocent question and out came this story. I was very lucky. There are plenty of people who didn't ask in time. And, they lost their parents, or that they were not able to relate the story anymore for one reason or another. So my first advice would be that ask questions, find out your history, because it really does matter. And sadly, we're so involved in our own lives when we're 30s and 40s and even 50s. And then, it gets to the point that it's almost, it gets to be too late to find out these stories. The G3, many of them are also genetically imprinted with these stories. Depends on the upbringing. But, I really didn't want to make my son crazy and, and have some of the hang-ups that I might have. But he does have some of the traits, some of the things like determination, determined to do the best possible job that he can always do, because it has to be that good. He's got some ambivalence about his history and his Judaism, which we all have, because there's so much hate rising again. It's would be very easy to put your head in the sand again. And I can't, I mustn't. I sometimes maybe want to, but I mustn't, because of what my parents went through. And it's essential that we keep spreading the world to the world about the possibilities that these horrible atrocities can happen again.
Right.
And there are warning signs ahead of time when, a leader becomes really authoritarian and, suppresses the media and the news and fake news. I mean, all those things. That was the main reason that at the end of my book, I put in this Nazi euphemism dictionary, which was a ton of work, and I'm very proud of it. And I hope people look at it, because I made a point of weaving in current jargon, current euphemisms that we use that hide the truth. That many of them are adopted from those years and even before those years, that we use to disguise what is going on. And that is really, really important to be aware of for the next generations.
Throughout your book, you mention your parents saying, "We're Jews, we're always afraid, never tell them you're Jewish," and then struggling with that idea.
The rector of our Basilica of St. Mary, who is an amazing man, and he commissioned an oratorio that tells the story through music, and it's transformative. It's an amazing piece. I played Kol Nidre that night in the Basilica of St. Mary in a Roman Catholic church, a big, huge church, at a time when I was reticent about revealing that I'm Jewish, and I had the same kind of ambivalence and nerves in the pit of my stomach, wondering how would people receive that piece and how would it feel to play that piece in a church, when I was taught that, don't tell them and, don't, So that was cathartic for me. That was a turning point in my life.
You grew up with this thing about never tell them you're Jewish, keep quiet, but then you come to this moment where you said, no, never keep silent. Tell people, ask questions, and I think that is amazing. I mean, to have been told something your whole life and understanding the context of where your parents were coming from, saying that or thinking that, but then saying, oh, you know what? We have to tell people. We can't be quiet. We can't let these polite words say things, and then it becomes easier to say things that are not so nice,
And that's what Elie Wiesel did say, which was the bystanders are the ones that are, just as reprehensible of people that, turned a blind eye to what they saw was going on. And, none of us know what we would have done. We can't predict it, but we can certainly try to condition ourselves to know that we have to speak up when we see injustice.
I saw an interview with him once where he was talking about, what if you were my last hope? What do you do then? And he said something to the effect of, live up to it. basically, which is basically my interpretation of that was that, like if you're the person who knows the story, tell the story, because that story shouldn't die with you.
There was always the excuse in those days that, oh, we didn't know. The newspapers were suppressed. They didn't have, internet and technology, and they didn't even have phones. They radios were confiscated, things like that. So the news wasn't traveling nowhere near as easily as it does today.
Right.
But in fact, because we have technology, because the news is constantly in our face, we are all bystanders if we don't say something, because we know what's going on.
The strength of our society depends upon the well-being of every person, no matter their faith, gender, or color. As the world tilts toward authoritarianism, the instinct to forget and deny will be enormous. As our way of life is endangered, rather than allow fear to resurge, we have the opportunity to act. This feels urgent now.
Years ago, my sister gave me a little book of South American proverbs, and one of them is, eyes that are closed will not see. It doesn't matter how much internet you put in front of somebody here, how many of podcasts interview you and you talk about this. People who don't want to listen won't hear,
Sure. Yeah.
So I didn't realize that the Holocaust deniers, I didn't realize, I don't think I can say that I didn't know that was a thing. I just kind of didn't register in my head. It was kind of like out there, like, no, that can't be real. There are people who say it never happened. But so that's one of the things that was really hard for me to read about in your book. These people who say that it never happened. Like, what? It doesn't compute in my brain. So I'm just mentioning that. I don't know if there's much we can say about that for the same reason. If people don't want to listen now, what do we do? Just keep talking. Is that the answer?
I hope so. I hope there's an answer. But it's laced in with years of anti-Semitism and racism and hate. And, there are many groups that come out with saying that the Holocaust never happened, or it was exaggerated, or they're lying, and they're making it up.
Yeah.
And now they say, oh, you Jews, you're still using the Holocaust as your excuse for pity.
Because it's so long ago.
Yeah.
It's that's one of the most shocking things about it, actually, is that we're not talking about like 400 years ago. We're not talking about, I don't know, the Inquisition or something. We're talking about now, like your parents, like this is very recent history.
Except that the way things are being taught in schools today, when I went to Hamlin to get my MFA, I was the oldest person, of course, in the class, and they thought, oh, this little old lady thinks she can write, maybe, but many of the classmates were 40-somethings who had decided to go back to school to get a further degree, to get a better job, whatever.
Right.
And it was just incredible to me that when we exchanged our manuscripts to critique each other, these younger people, had never heard these stories. Their history went not even to Vietnam, not even to the Korean War. They went only as far back as Afghanistan and Iraq.
Wow.
And when I was floored, and when I say that in my talks, people are just amazed that in many, many classrooms, the history does not go to the Holocaust as education. We're pushing for that to be mandated, areas.
I can say, I mean, it's a small little part of the world, but I am sitting in this international school in Shenzhen, and I can tell you that I think my students would be surprised by that. And I teach middle school primarily, and some high school. And I think my students hearing that would be surprised. So hopefully that's heartening, that not everywhere. People are talking as well. So you just mentioned, you're driving in the car with your dad. You're not really chatting. You're just kind of like driving the car. And then you thought, I know he loves to talk shop, which I don't know about you, but me too. And you said, so did you ever play with Leonard Bernstein? Puts his hands on his cheeks and he kind of sits silent for a while. And you're thinking, do I pull over? What do I do? What's going on right now? And then he just opens up.
Briefly, and then, didn't want to talk more. Yeah, it opened the floodgate. Yeah.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of all of this then. Is that correct?
Totally correct. Yeah.
So it ended up that he had played 2 concerts in Landsberg, right? Or one in Landsberg and one somewhere else.
One in Feldafing, both on the same day. Both were displaced persons camps.
Right. Those are notable because it was with Leonard Bernstein, right? But he played like 200 concerts to those people,
Right.
which, if that doesn't speak to the second half of the title of your book, The Transformative Power of Music, then what does? I mean, like, these people have just been through hell and they're listening to music, and these musicians are being sent around.
Bus twice a week all over Bavaria to 100 different displaced persons camps.
So somebody understood the importance of that. They understood how important it was for those people to have something to feel a positive thing again.
Right. It was the Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which still exists, and they go to war zones and try to help. And it was also the United Nations Relief Organization, and they sponsored this orchestra to do these concerts, morale boosting concerts.
Right.
And the musicians were paid in American canned goods and food and sugar, things that were impossible to get.
It kind of goes back to the whole concept of this podcast here, Our Mind on Music, is like, it's not just the audience was receiving that and having like a reminder that life can be beautiful as well through music, but it's also, you ask the question, how did those musicians pick up their instruments and play? Your dad was breaking rocks, right?
Exactly.
How did he pick up a cello? Like, there's a fine motor skill to that after wielding a sledgehammer for a while. Like, the determination just to be able to do that. And somebody who hasn't played a cello maybe doesn't know specifically what I'm saying here, but you know full well what that is. How did they do that? Do you know? Like, have you gained a better understanding over time?
No, I know that if I don't play a week, I feel out of shape, right? One of the stories that people are very moved by is that my father happened to run into a German guard, or it was probably a Hungarian Nazi guard, who possibly had a son my father's age, possibly loved the cello or loved classical music, and gave my father a pair of gloves when he was doing his work with a pickaxe in the middle of winter. But there were other places where guards deliberately broke people's fingers. So there were great musicians that could never play again. Terrible, horrible things. So yeah, he did have the luck that when he made his way to Romania at that time, just hiding on a cargo train and going to the border, where he knew that there were organizations that were helping them delouse and feeding them. And he was taken in by a family that had a cello. And so he was able to just start trying to move his fingers again. This is prior to being in this orchestra and escaping from Hungary eventually. But anyway, there's, a lot of incredible stories. And actually, there are 6 million of them,
Yeah. Again, for me, I guess I'd call it, like, the reason I started looking into your book before reading it was the music. It was the connection there. And then, of course, as is often the case, you shine a flashlight into a cave, you see, what the flashlight is touching, but there's a whole big cave there, and as you walk, you learn more and more and more. I'm learning about things like the Kaddish. Am I saying that correctly?
Kaddish, yeah.
Yeah. So, like, I didn't know what that was before reading your book and before researching further, and Shema, which, am I right in saying that was key in saving your father?
Yeah. I mean, it's luck, it's a fluke, it's, whatever, meant to be, that sometimes these lucky things or fortunate things happen, that he was able to a Russian guard, prove that he was not a German trying to escape, but he was a Jew, to say this prayer that it's, the defining prayer of the Jewish people that saved his life. Yeah, he realized that, he didn't have to shoot him. He wasn't a deserter, right? Yeah, there are so many, I don't even know what to call them.
Yeah, I guess you just have to call it that. I mean, and as you point out many times, not everybody was as lucky. And one of the things I remember reading and hearing is so many survivors say they were lucky that such and such. And to think that somebody can frame being lucky within that context is like, it is in itself mind-blowing to think. How can you think you were lucky because it wasn't as bad as it could possibly be? Like,
there's a bit of a hierarchy, and we should probably just leave it at this, but some survivors, like my father, like people who were in slave labor just because they happened to be in their 20s and not in their 50s, or not pregnant or not sick or whatever, weren't sent to Auschwitz. The ones that were sent to the worst concentration camps, and it's not only Auschwitz, but Mauthausen and Birkenau, and there's many others, Dachau, that were fate that meant that death. So they don't feel that they should be called Holocaust survivors because they didn't end up in Auschwitz. I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit, but yeah, some people who didn't experience the absolute worst feel lucky. And my father also was lucky that he was on the last train that did not go to Auschwitz.
You're presenting about your book, about this story, I should say, because I don't think you're speaking about the book. You're speaking about the 70-year story and sort of what else you've shone a flashlight on in this cave of information. What's next for you? Do you think there's another book to be written about further experience of this, or what's next?
Well, first of all, I'm still in this. I have a lot of engagements coming up, and I'm still speaking all over the place, from smaller book clubs and bookstores, to I'm a keynote speaker at one of the colleges here, which is funded by a Jewish Christian Relations Council. And I'm doing the Phoenix. I'm doing a couple of things out of state. So I'm still working with people and having conversations about this book. I still write for Interlude HK, short essays about everything about music, from funny stories behind the scenes and music that I love, or whatever. So one of the thoughts that I might do in the future would be to cull, maybe I've written 425 articles, so cull 80, 90 of the best ones and put that into a book, which would be fun and interesting for people, I hope. The story ends in 2018, but I stumbled on some paperwork through a genealogist who found that my grandfather had 8 siblings, none of whom we knew anything about. And so if I continue this journey, when I have time, it would be to see if I can trace any people that may have emigrated elsewhere, and there may be descendants somewhere, still. And there are people, families still being united, cousins or, aunts and uncles that you didn't know about.
I realize, partially from your answer, that, my question is a little hard to answer because you never really know what connections, like whatever you do next, the next time you're speaking about this story, the person that you meet there that you didn't know about right now, and that shoots off in a different trajectory that you couldn't have imagined.
It happens often. It happened with music where you'd play a concert and never know who was in the audience that said, oh yeah, I'd like to have her come and play that concerto somewhere else. And it happens with the book a lot, that people say, oh, I loved your talk. You should come here and there to speak too. So
yeah. One of the things I love to ask, Janet, because I know we're coming to the end of our conversation here. One of the things I love to ask is, of anything that we've talked about, of any questions that I asked in this chat, is there something that you wish I had asked that I didn't ask?
You asked pretty much everything. I mean, if you'd allow me, there's one couple paragraphs that I like to read when I conclude my talks. Would that be okay?
Absolutely.
So I like to conclude with this excerpt from the book. Consider a time when hell was on earth, when hands accustomed to a musician's bow, a writer's pen, a doctor's scalpel, a painter's brush, a tailor's needle, wielded shovelfuls of rocks, limestone, or human remains, when the air smelled of smoke, ashes, and grief, when the foundations of existence and the illusions that sustain us crumbled. My father, a young man confident of his future, wrenched from society, a celebrated artist turned slave laborer. The swollen and bloody knuckles, the back-breaking effort, the swirling musical phrases stilled. Depleted by the shame of helplessness, the shock of nakedness, the dread of men in uniform stomping by, he could never again tolerate being alone. A whiff of boiling cabbage or rusted copper or dripping blood triggered distress. In our family, trust was never regained. After the years of grief and imposed silence, my father's hands tingled to fill the stillness, and the hunger to create gnawed. His playing blossomed with a vitality, profundity, and spirituality I can only marvel at now. It must have been unnerving to learn how to feel again, when survival entailed learning how not to feel. At least while he was playing, music imparted peace of mind. His cello wept, his music making stirred those who were equally scarred. A strange sensation would ripple in my throat when he played. The generous vibrato warmed the sound and conveyed a deeply moving story, expressed not in words or thoughts, but in emotions illuminating a path to rebirth. I know now that beauty and inspiration ignites the best of the human spirit, the untenable pulsating, the tactile sensation of hugging the instruments and breathing the music as one, creates a current that transforms us, elevates us, unites us, and propels us in ways we cannot explain.
Wow. See, that's why I have to read the book again. I've read that once, I've heard it once, I've now heard it twice, and it doesn't lose anything. Thank you.
Thank you so much for taking all this time to really delve into my book the way you have. You seem to know every page, and that's exciting. And take care.
We hope you'll enjoy the following performance of Kol Nidre with cellist Janet Horvath, accompanied on the piano by Heather McLaughlin.